Let's begin with his impact. Notice that Jesus says it did not fall because it had been founded upon the rock. It did not fall. So here Jesus provides a criterion for his own teaching in verse 26. Does it last? Does it stand the test of time? Does it endure the tides of change? Does it make a lasting impact? Now, for many today, Jesus is just a word you use when your hammer impacts your thumb. All right, you miss the nail. Say, Jesus, worshiping all of a sudden. Some today see him as a sectarian religious figure with little relevance to the modern world. Some see him as a figment or fabrication of the early church. Some wonder whether he even lived at all. But the impact of his teaching suggests he did, that he lived, that he was a great teacher, and that there was something unique about his teaching that has made it as enduring as a house built upon rock. Some examples. The New Testament documents themselves are evidence of impact, are they not? I mean, not even as scripture, but just as historical artifacts. You have 27 documents with multiple authors, all dating between 10 and 60 years after his life, all focused on one person, Jesus. And then we have other documents that archaeologists have found, historians have preserved, outside of the Christian faith from the same time. Documents that reference the teaching of Jesus. For example, the Epistle of Mara. It's a pagan text dating shortly after AD 73. In the Epistle of Mara, we have a father who is apparently writing to a son, and he compares Jesus to the great Greek teachers, Socrates and Pythagoras. He's like, Socrates, Pythagoras, and that other guy, Jesus. Wow. Another example, Josephus, the first century Jewish historian writing for a Roman audience. Here's what Josephus says in his book, Antiquities. About this time, there lived Jesus, a wise man, for he was one who wrought surprising feats and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews, Josephus is Jewish, and many of the Greeks. He's writing to Romans as well. So notice here, from around the time of Jesus, we see someone outside the faith calls him a wise man, calls him a teacher. Notice the reference to miracles, surprising feats, a large following. He won over many, Josephus says, and various ethnicities, Jews, of course, and then Greeks, non-Jews. Likewise today, historians today, even outside the church, recognize the impact of Jesus on the wider world. So, for example, British intellectual H.G. Wells once wrote, "I'm an historian. I'm not a believer. But I must confess, as a historian, that this penniless preacher from Nazareth is irrevocably the very center of history. Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all of history. We know the invention of hospitals, universities, even the scientific revolution itself, the abolition of slavery, the spread of literacy around the world today, have all been traced back to the teachings of Jesus." Recently, British intellectual Tom Holland, also not writing as a Christian, writes, "The teaching of Jesus is the most influential framework for making sense of human existence that has ever existed." This is a good book, by the way. I really recommend Dominion, How the Christian Revolution Remade the World. In this book, Tom Holland, he's arguing that the way we think today as a culture has been entirely shaped by the teachings of Jesus. Human rights, care for the poor, racial equality, bodily autonomy. In tracing this history, Holland, he doesn't avoid the church's failures and atrocities, and there have been some, but he argues that even when we must condemn the church, we can't do it without invoking the teachings of Jesus. Isn't that interesting? He suggests even that if there are fewer people in church today, it may be because we have so much of the teaching of Jesus just infusing society outside of the church. So the impact of Jesus has been significant. 2,000 years later, his teaching remains a powerful force for good. The house on his rock still stands, still shapes the modern world. So his impact supports the claim that the rock in your life is the word of his life. It might just be trustworthy. So that's his impact. This brings us to his message. What is the word that makes our lives solid? What was his message? So let's look secondly at the message. Everyone, he says, who hears these words of mine, that message, and acts. So what are these words of his mentioned in verse 24? What are the words that can change a life? The immediate context, of course, is the Sermon on the Mount. This is the conclusion, the closing paragraph of the Sermon on the Mount. And if you've read the sermon, and if you haven't, you really should read it. It's Matthew 5-7. Here we find some of Jesus' most famous teachings. Love your enemies. Turn the other cheek. Go the extra mile. Do unto others. Beautiful sermon. Be anxious for nothing. You can't serve two masters, he says. Do not judge. So that's all there. Now, these are ethical teachings, very important. But the message of Jesus is not primarily ethical. It's not primarily an ethical message, is it? It's not about what we have to do for God. The message of Jesus is primarily about what God has done for us in his dear son, Jesus.